Making this video is going to be difficult because it's about suicide. If you're suicidal, if you're thinking of harming yourself, stop what you're doing, stop watching this video, and find someone to talk to immediately. If you don't have someone that you trust, if there's not a person in your life or in your community that you trust, then pick up the phone and call 911 or go to an emergency room or a police station and walk in and let them know, or fire department, let them know what you're thinking, let them know what you're feeling. Go get some help. In this video, I'm gonna share some stories that will shed some light on some close encounters I've had with suicide. And one of the stories might give you some hope, but if you're imminently thinking about right now, go get some help. If you know someone who's considering suicide or someone who is thinking about harming themselves, in the same vein, very soon, very quickly, you need to go and engage someone who can help them to work through that. With that said, I'm doing this video with the purpose of shedding some light on my experiences, some of my experiences with suicide, and the idea that people who encounter people who are thinking about suicide may have a little bit more frame of reference that they can use. Suicide is a prominent problem in the community. A recent statistic I saw said that it was the number 10 cause of death in the United States and number 2 among teenagers. So it is a serious consideration, it's a serious problem, and I want this video to be done in a way that is serious and that is respectful for anyone who may have come close to the situation. I'm going to alter the stories enough that I believe no identities will be revealed. They're going to be based on the truth. They're going to be based on true experiences I have had, but I want to alter them just enough so that the time and the altered details will protect anyone whose confidentiality is involved. The first story comes from when I worked in a mental hospital. I worked in the acute unit of a mental hospital. The first time I met her, she still had the stains from the activated charcoal on the corners of her mouth, and there was a little line where it had dripped out that was running down. She was sitting on the cot in the room. We called it the isolation room. The isolation room was about 10 by 10. If I recall correctly, it was carpeted. The only thing in the isolation room was the cot and the mattress and the pads on the walls. The hospital called it the isolation room, but the patients called it the padded cell. The psych tech had to let me in because it was locked, and he put a chair down for me to sit in to talk to her. She was wearing just a t-shirt, some baggy sweatpants, and those ridiculous sock things that hospitals give you that have the little traction on the bottom. There were no laces, there were no belts, no blankets, nothing that could be used to choke yourself with. I'd read her file, I'd read her chart, and she had been admitted because she had attempted to suicide by overdose. I don't remember the circumstances that put me in the isolation room with her. Ultimately, she was someone else's patient, but that day, her first encounter with the hospital was me. So I sat down and began to talk to her, and very quickly she unfolded her situation, her story. Early in the conversation, she admitted that she was glad that she had been stopped. The circumstances that had led her to such a desperate act was the culmination of her 17 years of life in the family that she was a part of and the community that they lived in. She said that her parents were both addicted to drugs. Her aunts and uncles were also participating in the lifestyle, whether they were addicted or not, she wasn't sure. She said that the community was unsupportive and that she had become desperate and could only think to end her life. In an odd twist of good fortune, she had been arrested because of possession of prescription drugs that were, legally obtained. And as a 17-year-old, the court had sentenced her to a 30-day psych evaluation, which was unheard of at that time because of the way insurance regulations worked out. No one got more than 72 or 96 hours. For her to get 30 days was a ray of hope. And in those 30 days, the therapist who actually was her therapist was able to make a lot of progress with her. I continued to see her in group counseling sessions where over those 30 days, she found a ray of hope. She found that ray of hope that the situation that she was in was not the only possible situation that she could be in. That as she approached adulthood, she could find her way out of that situation and into a life that would not be dominated by an addicted, dysfunctional community and family. What we draw out of this first story is that though the circumstances seemed at the moment for the girl an insurmountable, intractable, unchangeable situation, once she got some help, once she got into a situation where she was safe and there were people around her trying to help her, that unraveled and hope returned. She was glad that she had been stopped. And she was glad for the second chance that she had to recreate and to go forward. The situation that someone might find themselves in where they feel like there is no getting out of this, there is no hope, there is no direction that can go, that is often a false situation. It is almost always a false situation. I cannot think of a circumstance where it is utterly without hope. The path to hope may be difficult, it may be hard, it may be unpleasant, it may take a long time, but transcending the circumstances is, in my experience, is always a possibility. The second story I want to tell comes from a job fair that I was a part of. About 20 years ago, I took part in a career. It was kind of like a career fair, but it was also sort of a matching career counseling event. And part of the event, they had done some interest survey, inventory things, and we broke up into small groups to talk about the results. And each counselor had a table with 3 or 4 people at it. And I'd been at a table with a man and 2 women. And about 2 months later, my phone rings. It was the organizer of the career fair. And he was asking me about the man who had been at my table. He asked me if he had said anything that was concerning. And I said, nothing really comes to mind. Why? He says, well, 2 nights ago he committed suicide. And his sister has been calling, trying to piece together. There was no evidence, there was nothing that would have led, and she's just trying to get any information. And I said, no, we looked at his resume, and he talked about some jobs that he wanted to apply for, and we looked at his survey results and tried to make sense of them in the context of his job search. I said there was nothing that he said that had any indication that he would take his own life. And the guy that organized the event, he said, well, the sister's just trying to make sense of things. She said that he had been down for some time since he had lost his job, but that seemed normal. And he seemed to be trying to get things together. But ultimately, when it came to it, there was no evidence that he was going to harm himself. There was nothing. And my encounter with him that day had been very routine. And if there were any thoughts that he was having, he didn't indicate them at that table. And the only thing that had been in the awareness of the sister was that he'd been down a little bit, and she had thought that, you know, it wasn't a big deal, but yet it was a big deal, because under the surface was this erosion. And ultimately, he got to the point where, without telling anybody anything or saying anything overtly, he took his own life. This story illustrates that sometimes there's no predictor that suicide is imminent, that a person is thinking about or considering suicide. There are a lot of things that you see that you go, that might mean the person is having suicidal thoughts. Long bouts with depression, trying to put their affairs in order, giving away cherished possessions, a sudden interest in or a sudden abandonment of religion and religious thought and religious content. There are many, many things that are predictors. But the absence of those things does not necessarily mean the absence of suicidal thoughts. For a person who is concerned about someone else, the thing to do is to ask. To ask someone to say, are you thinking of hurting yourself? Are you thinking of committing suicide? And immediately people go, whoa, I don't want to put that thought in anybody's head. Here's the thing. If you're in the 21st century, in the Western culture, pretty much everybody's heard of suicide. This is not gonna be a new idea to them. That is already extant in their memory. They know that word, they know what it means. And the research says you are not going to plant the idea to do it. They already know what it is. You're not going to persuade them to do it by asking them if they're thinking about it. So asking someone if they're thinking about killing themselves, asking someone if they're thinking about harming themselves, first of all, it's not going to plant the idea in their mind. And second, the answer they give you is going to lead to getting help or identifying the fact that they don't need help. By telling you that they're one step closer to not doing it. The next story comes from another period in my life when I had a very close encounter and was just a little too late. When his roommate called, I was only a couple blocks away. Immediately started there. The roommate said something terrible had happened. and that he'd already called 911. When I got to the apartment, the roommate pointed to his bedroom, and through the gap in the door that was partially open, I could see him lying on the floor. The belt was still around his neck. About then I turned around and the paramedics started coming in the door, and I moved back and got out of their way. Asked the roommate the natural question, what happened? And the roommate did not know. And the roommate had no idea. The investigation concluded that it was suicide. None of his friends had any idea. There was no note. His laptop computer, people who knew his password, people he had trusted with his password, looked for something on the laptop. There were no emails, there were no notes, there was nothing. It made no sense. A couple days earlier, he had made an appointment for Saturday to get his hair cut. The next day, a delivery from Amazon was expected, was coming with something he'd been wanting to have for a long time. He had made plans for a project that he was going to play an important role in, and it was going to involve himself and several other people. And it was a sort of big deal. There was no note, there was no explanation, there was no way to figure out why it had happened. Something had changed. That's the thing about this story. There were many things in his life that suggested that he was not suicidal, yet something happened. Something happened, and it must have happened quickly. And none of the people close to him could identify what it was. They decided it was a suicide, and it left all of his friends and family devastated and utterly confused. His death was ruled a suicide, yet there were things in place. He had appointments. He had recently made appointments for the near future, and he had began the process for some long-term plans. And something happened. And those things are generally not part of a person who is suicidal. The point of this last story is that things can change quickly. And you need to be paying attention to the people you love, and the people that are around you, and the people who you're in charge of, and the people who you work with, and the people who you see on a daily basis. You need to pay attention enough that you might catch that sudden change. I saw a movie one time where the character was all like da-da-da, everything's great, and the phone rang, and they spoke on the phone for a moment, and their complete countenance changed. And the viewer of the movie didn't know what the phone call was, but you knew something had happened. And when they hung that phone up, they were a completely different person. It happened that fast. Now, that was a movie. Something happened in the story that I just told. Something happened in the young man's life quickly. No one was expecting. No one predicted. No one caught it. These three things. I want these three things to maybe open your eyes, not to make you like freaking out thinking everybody is going to kill themselves, but to be paying attention, to recognize that no matter how dreadful the situation is, the possibility exists that with the right help and the right people involved, hope can be restored, that there is hope for a new, there is hope for a change, there is hope for that. The absence of the symptoms doesn't necessarily mean the absence of the thought. So go ahead and ask people. If you have any suspicion at all, go ahead and ask. And lastly, pay attention, because changes can occur very quickly. This is a hard subject, and my training as a school teacher, my former training and practice in counseling tell me that it's an important subject that everyone needs to be attending to. And the program we went through in a recent training class at school likened to CPR. When millions of people are aware of how to do CPR, more people are saved from heart attacks. The more people who are aware of and attuned to suicide and suicide prevention, the more people they're going to be saved from suicide. I appreciate you watching this video. If you're still watching, I know this was a hard one to get through. Please let these lessons inform the way you approach your future with people around you. Let these stories serve as illustrations that you can borrow these stories and say, I saw this video, this guy told this story. Do that. If it helps you to save someone's life, if it helps you to help someone get into a treatment program, if it helps you help someone to move into a phase where they can begin to heal, take the stories. That's all I got for this one. See you in the next one.